Don't you dare use our toilet. A failure of a daughter-in-law like you isn't part of the family, and yet, you have the audacity to walk into our house as if it's your right. Such a shameless woman. We provide shelter to an outsider like you, but we didn't hear a single word of thanks.
Thank you.
What was that? I can't hear you. More importantly, how long do you plan on sitting there? The thought of you, dirty as you are, touching anything in this house, disgusts me. Your filth could spread, even pollute the air. From now on, take a bath outside. That should be good enough for you.
But there's no public bath open at this time.
What are you talking about? There's a park right over there. It has toilets and faucets, doesn't it? With those words, my mother-in-law locked me out of the house. Let's go back a bit in time. After marrying Mike, and since we both worked, I moved into his parents' house to live with his folks. I used to visit Mike's family home occasionally even before we got married, and each time, my father-in-law would treat me kindly, as if I were his own daughter. Having lost my father when I was young, I thought of my father-in-law almost like my own father. However, just before our wedding, my father-in-law fell ill and had been hospitalized by the time we started living there. On the other hand, my mother-in-law, in stark contrast to my father-in-law, started treating me coldly. In front of Mike's dad, she would smile and act gently towards me, but as soon as he was gone, she would say things like, "Your cooking is too salty. Are you trying to make me sick? The air feels worse when you're around," almost like verbal abuse. My mother-in-law, a stay-at-home wife, always at home, made the times we were alone together the most difficult. I began working longer hours just to avoid going home. My mother-in-law's sarcastic comments only grew more frequent as I continued to work late every day. Before I knew it, she would nag at me every time she saw my face and sigh exaggeratedly. One day, after coming home from work, I was greeted by my mother-in-law's usual scowl, telling me, "Don't walk around the house with your dirty body. You'll make everything dirty." I was hungry and wanted to eat dinner first, but reluctantly headed to the bath. However, my mother-in-law, standing in front of the changing room, looked at me with a disgusted frown. "You're not thinking of using our bath, are you?"
But I thought I should clean off the dirt."
"Clean yourself outside. The audacity of thinking you can use our bath. How brazen of you."
"Outside, but at this time there are no public baths open nearby."
"If you go far enough, you'll find a place that's open, won't you? Look it up yourself. I'm a germaphobe after all. The mere thought of an unsanitary person like you in the same house makes me sick."
"What should I do then?"
"You staying in the house will just spread the dirt. After all, a daughter-in-law isn't really family, so manage your own baths and toilet outside."
"How can I manage that?"
"Quiet. There are toilets in the park. And there's even a faucet for bathing, right? Stop dawdling and get out." With that, my mother-in-law pushed me out. Standing outside the closed door, I was dumbfounded. I was used to being scolded with harsh words daily, but this was a first. I thought surely I would be allowed to use the bath by the next day, so I spent the night at an internet cafe a few stations away. But this thought of mine was naive. Days passed, and I was still not allowed to use either the bath or the toilet. I resorted to bathing at public baths using my paycheck and relieving myself at a nearby park. Yet my mother-in-law's unreasonable demands didn't stop there. She eventually said, "Since I'm letting you live here, it's only right you give me your earnings. Rent. It's rent. Trying to live and eat for free. How utterly low can you be?" The money was meant to help support my mother living alone in the countryside, but overwhelmed by Lisa's insistence, I ended up handing over my salary. Mike saw how I was treated, but always put his mother first. Even on cold days when I had to go outside to use the restroom, he would turn a blind eye. Sometimes, he would even join his mother in mocking me. Over half a year of living with them, the treatment never improved. It only got worse. Why did I have to endure such treatment? I thought about this time and again. But Mike was on his mother's side, and his father was in the hospital. My own mother had suffered from stress-related illness in the past, and I didn't want to worry her. I had no one else to rely on. So I had no choice but to endure the unreasonable treatment every day. Life at home was tough, filled with constant nagging. Since all my earnings were handed over to my mother-in-law, and Mike certainly didn't give me any allowance, I couldn't even afford to spend time outside to escape. Moreover, since my mother-in-law didn't do any housework, I had to take care of all household chores, which meant even if I returned home late, I would still be scolded. I couldn't afford new clothes or even a visit to the hair salon, so my days were spent feeling increasingly worn out, both physically and emotionally. Occasionally, I looked forward to visiting the public bath with the little money I had left after work, but between Lisa's complaints about me slacking off on housework and financial issues, I couldn't afford to go every day, and my body started to develop itchiness and other signs of distress. One day, as I was heading to the park to use the restroom, as usual, I saw my father-in-law. I remembered that he was scheduled to have a day out from the hospital, as his health had improved. I had planned to pick him up later, but it seemed he had managed to come back on his own. With the same kind and unchanged smile, my father-in-law greeted me as if nothing had changed.
"Naomi, what are you doing here?"
Just going to the restroom.
The restroom, the restroom. Don't we have one at home? Is it broken?
No, it's not that.
Is something the matter?
Telling my kind father-in-law about how I've been treated at home would surely worry him. I didn't want to cause him any concern. However, unable to hold it any longer, I ended up telling him everything in a rush.
I've been told that I'm not part of the family, so I shouldn't use the toilet or the bath in the house.
What?
Because Lisa is a germaphobe. She can't stand the idea of someone else, like me, using the toilet or the bath.
And Mike hasn't said anything about this.
Mike gets along well with his mom, so he hasn't really done anything.
I see.
With a heavy sigh, my father-in-law apologized to me, saying, "Let's go home together. I'm sorry for everything that has happened." His words nearly made my tightly wound feelings unravel. Holding back tears that threatened to spill, I finished up in the restroom and returned home with him. Once home, my father-in-law gathered my mother-in-law and Mike in the living room. Initially pleased by her husband's return, my mother-in-law was puzzled by his unusual demeanor.
I've heard about what's been going on from Naomi.
What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. I heard you've been denying Naomi access to our home's toilet and bath because she's not family.
Well, that's...
And on top of that, you've been taking all of her salary, haven't you?
Why would you know that? My mother-in-law glared at me. However, my father-in-law stepped between us, shielding me from her gaze.
That's not right. You should be reflecting on how you've treated Naomi. Yes, she's an outsider, but she came to be part of our family by marrying Mike. Instead of welcoming her with gratitude, you've treated her terribly. We were all strangers before becoming a family. It's precisely because we're strangers that we need to be considerate to become a family. What have you been doing, and Mike?
Mike flinched when his name was called.
You're her husband. You're protecting the wrong person. It's not about always defending your mother. You need to protect your wife. That's a husband's duty.
But
No buts. You're an adult, Mike. It's time to start acting like it. Mike, visibly intimidated by his father's calm yet stern demeanor, glanced at his mother.
it's not like we were intentionally neglecting Naomi, right, Mom?
In a moment of desperation, Mike looked to his mother for support, who quickly turned back to face her husband after a brief glance at Mike. No, you've got it all wrong. Mike told me, if Naomi doesn't use the toilet or bath at home, we can save on the water bill, and since her salary belongs to us, we should take it all. I said I couldn't do such a cruel thing, but Mike insisted.
Hey, Mom, what are you talking about?
I didn't want to, but I only did it because Mike told me to.
Don't make stuff up. It was you who started it, saying you couldn't stand Naomi using the water facilities, and you were the one who first said we could live better if we had free reign over Naomi's salary.
Oh, to think you would start saying such things to your own mother. Mike and his mother began to blame each other. I couldn't keep up with what was happening in front of me and could only stare blankly, unable to say anything. They were both insisting they weren't at fault. The friendly rapport they used to share was nowhere to be seen, replaced by ugliness. Next to me, my father-in-law sighed deeply.
Enough. I've heard enough of both of your feelings. You're both arguing over who is not at fault without even offering a single apology to Naomi. You should be ashamed. Both of you. Get out of the house right now. Cool off.
With that, my father-in-law quickly kicked them out of the house. After that, there were several exchanges with Mike and his mother, but far from showing any remorse, they only expressed resentment for being kicked out, directing their grievances at me and my father-in-law. Disgusted with both Mike and his mother, my father-in-law and I decided it was best to divorce and cut ties. When the divorce was settled, my father-in-law called me and apologized deeply.
The reason your mother-in-law became so selfish and acted as if she owned a place, and Mike living his life centered around his mother, is because I prioritized work over family. I had no right to lecture them about family when I wasn't a good husband or father myself. I wanted Mike to learn from my mistakes and build a good home with you, Naomi.
Charles.
How selfish of me, Naomi. I'm truly sorry. It's all my fault. It's a poor way to apologize, but I want to give you this house.
Charles, please lift your head. It's not your fault. And this house holds so many memories for you, right? I can't accept it.
But I want to make it up to you somehow. I've caused you so much trouble.
If you really want to make it up to me, could we sometimes have meals together?
Meals? Is that really enough for you?
Yes, they lost my father when I was young, so I've always thought of you as my real father. I want us to continue being close.
My father-in-law nodded at my words with a troubled yet happy expression. After that, I moved to an apartment and started living on my own. My father-in-law, who had been discharged from the hospital, seemed to have resumed life at home, and we often met up for enjoyable meals, catching up on each other's lives. In the course of our conversations, my father-in-law expressed a desire to meet my mother. It occurred to me that, apart from the wedding, my mother and my father-in-law had not met since. Although I divorced Mike, if I was going to maintain a relationship with my father-in-law, it seemed like a good idea for the three of us to have a meal together. About 3 months after the divorce, my mother, my father-in-law, and I went out to eat. Surprisingly, my mother and father-in-law got along well, and the meal went pleasantly. We hadn't been able to have a proper meet and greet before the wedding due to father-in-law's health and my mother's schedule, and we barely spoke beyond simple greetings at the wedding. Since they hadn't had much of a conversation before, it turned out that my mother and father-in-law, being close in age and sharing similar interests, hit it off quite well, and soon they were meeting up without me. The two of them quickly deepened their relationship, and now my father-in-law has truly become my father. I can still vividly remember how they came to me, a bit sheepishly, to discuss their plans to marry. I was so taken by surprise, touched, and so happy that I couldn't help but cry. My mother moved out from the countryside, and I gave up my apartment, so now the three of us live together happily in that house. As for Mike and his mother, according to what I've heard from my father-in-law, they're somehow managing to get by. Mike seems to be working hard to support his mother, but their relationship seems to deteriorate day by day due to her constant complaints and unreasonable demands. With me gone, it seems all of Mike's mother complaints have now turned towards him. Recently, overwhelmed by the stress of his job and the strain of living with his mother, Mike quit his job without discussing it with her. She seemed furious with him, but realizing that someone had to work to live, she reluctantly started working. But having been a stay-at-home wife and somewhat naive about the world, she struggles to find a suitable job and keeps quitting soon after being hired. From time to time, my father-in-law receives requests for financial assistance from Mike and his mother, but he has consistently refused them. He tells me and my mother they may be my family from the past, but the family I need to cherish now is this one right here, and he would look at us tenderly as he spoke. Besides, he continued,
If there's anything I can teach those two now, it's that they might understand the pain of others through their own hardships. Maybe if they learn to be kinder to people, someone willing to help them will come along.
He seemed a bit sad saying this. I, too, think about the future and the hardships it may bring, but I hope to never forget to be kind to others and cultivate a heart that considers others' feelings. I want to build a warm, gentle, and wonderful family like the one my mother and father-in-law have created.